This video is sponsored by Squarespace. This is Druka D. Loud. He's the resident Goff Rocker in my orc army, but he's also the proxy that I use to represent my Weirdboy. Both because he looks cooler than the official model, but also because I kinda like the idea of orcs using rock and roll as a psychic force of destruction. Over the past year, Druka has easily become one of my favorite characters in my entire orc army, so when I came face to face with the brand new Weirdboy sculpt from the Armageddon box this week, and realized he was now much bigger than Druka, I was forced to make a very difficult decision. Number one, we could rebase Druka on a larger base, maybe give him some scenic basing, or number two, we could retire the old Druka model, giving him a home on my editing desk, and we could convert the new Weirdboy sculpt into Druka Season 2 version with an updated look for the new edition. And based on the video title, you can probably deduce which option I chose. I started out this conversion by removing the new Weirdboy's arms as cleanly as possible using my clippers. I then tried out a variety of different arm sculpts using mostly bits from the Cromlech Rocker Boy set that they sent me last October, and while I have used up a lot of the good parts from that kit, I luckily still had a microphone arm still left over, which is one of Druka's iconic accessories. Well, for the other arm, I tested out a number of different guitars before realizing eventually that I had already used the perfect guitar for Druka on another standard orc boy. So after apologizing to this boy many times and promising that I would give him even better arms later on, I removed his arms, clipped the secondary hand off the guitar, shaved off the excess, and tested out the pose on Druka number 2. As suspected, it fit just perfectly, giving our new Goff Rocker Weirdboy a nice dynamic pose. After testing out this pose with poster putty, I attempted to affix the arms permanently using some green stuff, mixing some epoxy sculpt into the green stuff to give it a more clay-like texture, and smoothed out the excess around the arm joints, alternating between a soft silicone sculpting tool and a rounded metal tool to attempt to make these joints look a little bit more natural. While this was drying, I toyed around with the idea of putting a top hat on our new Weirdboy to match Druka's iconic hat from his previous sculpt. And for this version, you can see I tried chopping the head off of one of Cromlech's gentle orc heads, but I wasn't quite sold on the final look of this hat on the new sculpt. It looked a little bit too stage magician for my liking, so I'm going to end up sculpting a better version later on in this tutorial. And after leaving this rough first pass of epoxy to dry overnight, I returned the following day to add a smoother, more detailed sculpting pass to the model, this time using just regular green stuff, and once again, using my metal tools to get the epoxy in place, and then smoothing it out using the silicone smoothing tool. My original goal here was to smooth out the joins to make it look like the back muscles were attached to the muscles, but I soon realized it would be a lot easier and look a lot cooler if we just sculpted on Druka's existing studded metal vest onto his back underneath the leather harness. Here you can see I'm using my hobby knife to create a sort of ripped fabric surface towards the armholes of the vest, as well as around all of the areas where these plugs are emerging from his back. Once again, using the rounded metal tool to smooth things back out when necessary. While I let this back part dry a little bit, I started sculpting on a brand new hat for our Weirdboy. To do this, I started out by rolling a tiny ball of green stuff between my fingers, and then flattening it out like a pancake, before sticking it onto the top of the Weirdboy's head, and then rolling out the texture I wanted, once again using the rounded metal sculpting tool. You can see here I am occasionally pinching the edges of the hat brim with my fingers to get a more crisp edge, and I'm also wearing gloves for all of the sculpting, so there's no fingerprints on the sculpt. I then let this part dry a bit and return to the back of the model to sculpt some metal studs into the vest to match the original vest from the first Goff Rocker sculpt. For this technique, I used tiny glass beads from the dollar store, as well as a tiny little bit of spare green stuff to pick up the beads from the dish and then press them down into the back of the model. For every few beads I added, you'll notice I'm also using my metal tool to press the beads deeper into the clay to make sure that they stay there once this model gets painted. After doing a ton of these, I realized it would probably read a little bit better as a leather vest without the torn elements, as leather doesn't really tend to tear that way. So at this point, I carved out a more defined vest edge with my X-Acto knife. Returning back to the front of the model, now that the base of the hat had some time to dry, it was time to sculpt the rest of the hat. I started this out by rolling a sort of fat cylinder between my fingers, pressing it down on the top of the hat, and then using my rounded sculpting tool to spread it out a little bit, texturing it more like a tattered top hat that has several folds in it. After this, I used my hobby knife to cut a sort of band into the hat to further define its shape, just like the original hat on the original sculpt. And I also cut a little tear into the front of the hat to make it look a little bit more worn and torn up since the original sculpt. Once again, you can see here I'm using my fingers to pinch the edges of things to create sharper corners on the fabric. But do you know what else has extremely sharp corners? That's right, it's this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform for all of your website needs, and they do pretty much anything you would want them to do. Let's say you want a professional-looking portfolio site to show off your painted work or photography. They've got pre-made templates and layouts for that, and it's super easy to customize them to be exactly how you want them to be, with everything being drag and drop and no coding required. They also have templates for online stores or even a hub for any kind of services you might want to offer. Let's say you're a commission painter or something like that, with the built-in option to send invoices and accept payments from a number of different popular payment options. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a 14-day free trial. And then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. And now back to our video. With the hat sculpt more or less complete, my next idea was to use floral wire to attach Druka's mic to the wires in his weird harness thing that the original sculpt has, with the idea being that this weird collar somehow amplifies his music as he no longer has his squig amp from the original sculpt. This took quite a few different attempts to get a result that I liked, trying out several different types of wire, drilling lots of holes with my pin vise, as well as getting my fingers absolutely covered in super glue. But eventually I got this result, which I think looks quite good, where I braided two pieces of floral wire together before fraying the edges with my hobby knife and then gluing it to the edge of the microphone. I also used two other wires, one that's sort of broken off, which was maybe originally attached to the microphone, and another which is attached to the guitar. And for this, I used actual insulated wire from a spare charging cable that I didn't mind cutting up. While I was doing this, I also attached a tiny baby squig on top of his hat from the spare knob body you get in the Armageddon kit, which I think adds a nice little bit of personality to the sculpt. After this, I left the model overnight to fully cure, and then I added all of the final details to really make this guy look like a Goff Rocker. Starting out with the iconic skull emblem on his top hat, where I started out by using a ball of clay and flattening it onto the surface of the hat, and then using my X-Acto knife to cut it into a more skull-like shape. I then used my rounded metal tool to press eyes into the skull and a wedged silicone tool to create the nose hole. I then refined the shape a little bit more using these same tools, before using these same techniques to sculpt on Druka's iconic septum ring, once again starting out with a flattened ball and then removing clay until all that was left was a ring-type shape below the nostrils. After this, I wanted to bulk out the front of the leather vest a little bit, so I rolled out a few thin pieces of clay and cut them into squares to attach to the front of the model to form a sort of vest. I also used these same techniques as with the first skull to sculpt a second cartoon skull logo to be a sort of belt buckle for Druka and to add even more gothy interest to the model. Beyond this, I cut out a few more strips of clay to help bulk out the edges of the leather vest even more, and I even went so far as to make these strips extra gothy by adding a more checkerboard texture into them with my knife. Finally, after allowing our Goff Rocker another full 24 hours to dry, he was ready to paint. For the paint scheme on this guy, I wanted him to roughly match the previous model and the rest of my army, but I also wanted to do something a little bit special to help him stand out as a unique hero model. So I ended up going with an object source lighting heavy scheme to emphasize the power of the wah energy that's coming out of the one side of his face. To begin, I started out with a black prime and followed this up with a spray of titanium white from above and to the model's right-hand side to give the impression of projected light emanating from the right eye of the model and the sculpted on lightning bolt energy thing next to that eye. I also sprayed a little bit of this white color towards the tips of any of the wires where I thought we might see crackling energy. And once this was done, it was time to start applying color to the model, starting out by spraying the base of the model with Pro-Acryl Jade to match the rest of the army's basing scheme, as well as spraying slightly upward onto the model to get some nice bounce lighting from the ground. I then used some bright yellow-green to highlight a few areas on the base, but I also sprayed this all over the lit up side of the face as our object source lighting color to show the power of the wah energy, creating a sort of gradient from bright yellowish green on the top right hand side of the model to dark bluish green towards the bottom left hand side of the model. From here, I took our figure back to the regular non-airbrush part of the painting desk and started focusing on adding even more specific highlights and shadows. Starting out with titanium white to add even more specific highlights to any areas that would be lit up with wah energy. In contrasting this by mixing some black and purple together to get an almost black but not quite black purple color to put over any areas where I wanted deeper shadows, especially on the areas of black leather. I also used this same color to paint on some checkerboard patterning onto the tattered cloth streaming out behind the model, as this was one of the things I really liked about the heavy metal paint job on this figure. What's more gothy than checkerboard patterns? Nothing. And meanwhile, over on the right side of the model where there was more light, I used jade mixed with black for these same areas of shadow to add variety and to make these areas feel a little bit more green tinted the nearer to the light source that they are. I also used some pure jade to rim some of the cloth and other elements in areas where I wanted to emphasize the bounce lighting from the ground. And I painted on a few other details at this point, such as hazard stripes, using the same almost black color in place of regular black. After this, I glazed some thinned down bright yellow-green over any of the light source areas that I had previously painted with titanium white to blend them in. And in a few areas where I wanted to further refine this lighting source, I mixed some white into the yellow-green to get an even higher, brighter highlight. Next, it was time to start adding in some of the accent colors from the rest of the army's color scheme. And the main accent color for my existing army is of course red, so I mixed some burnt red and black together with just a touch of our jade color to show how the red would be affected by the greenish lighting. And I started by picking out just a few areas using this accent color. I didn't want it to be too overpowering, but I just wanted to see how it would look if I put a little bit of this color on the model. As I was doing this, I also started glazing on some golden yellow over the light source areas to make them look even brighter and to distinguish them from the rest of the green areas even more. I contrasted this by continuing to add more and more areas in our dark, almost black jade color. And I also started mixing in some of this more primary green color that I used for the previous Druka's skin color to help contrast the unlit areas of skin from the areas that are being lit by this greenish yellow glow. I also started to get a little bit bolder with the red accents at this point, as I found that they weren't messing up the color scheme too much, so I used some burnt red on some of the areas not being directly hit by the yellow-green energy to boost them up a little bit. I also brought in some golden brown at this point to start painting any of the off-white parts of the model, and I glazed over a few of these with yellow-green where necessary whenever they would be hit by that wah energy. And honestly, that's basically it. I continued using these same colors and techniques, further refining the paint job until I hit a point that I was happy with it and I was ready to call this model done. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this update to an old character in my army. I think this is the first time I've ever done this. I've always wanted to create a sequel to a model in my army, and I enjoyed doing this so much that I might take the same approach to a few of the other character sculpts in the Armageddon box. I hope this video was useful to you. Hopefully it gave you some ideas for your own orc boys, maybe some conversion ideas for what to do with your weird boy. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you especially to all of our wonderful, generous patrons who keep this channel running. And with that, I will see all of you in the next video.